My fiancé told me to enjoy my bachelorette trip before the wedding, but I came home early and caught him cheating on me. During the week leading up to our wedding, he kept kissing my forehead like he was trying to convince me he was innocent. It might sound dramatic, but tell me why a man who had never been especially affectionate suddenly turned into a walking greeting card just days before the wedding. Every time I walked into the kitchen, there he was with that soft little smile, touching my arm, asking if I was excited, asking if I had packed for the resort, asking if I had texted my friends back. It wasn't sweet, not really. It felt calculated, like he was trying to keep me focused in one direction long enough for something else to happen behind my back. I was 31. Tired in the specific way women get tired when they have a full-time job, a half-finished seating chart, a mother who thinks stress is proof you're disorganized, and a man saying, "We're almost there," like that sentence pays the bills. He was 30, freelancing between projects, which sounded noble until the rent came due. For most of the last year, I had been carrying more than my share because I loved him. And because I kept telling myself that partnership means sometimes one person has to be the steady one for a while. Yes, I know, please don't start. I've already had this argument with myself in at least 12 different showers. My friends had planned a bachelorette weekend at a resort out in the countryside. All fireplaces, hiking trails, and women pretending we still enjoyed matching pajamas. The wedding was set for the following Saturday, giving us one last girls' weekend before everything changed. I almost canceled twice, not because I didn't love them, I did, but something about leaving him alone that weekend didn't sit right with me. He had decided not to have a bachelor party, which on paper made him seem mature and above all that nonsense. His explanation was that he needed the weekend to work and make up for the time he'd be taking off for the wedding. Very responsible, very grown-up, very fake. As it turned out, the strange behavior had started in small ways. He stopped answering video calls unless I texted first. When I asked what he had for lunch, he gave me those vague, useless answers men give when they don't want follow-up questions. Just grabbed something, nothing exciting, I'm slammed. He also kept bringing up the resort. "You have to go, your friends worked hard on this. Don't make it weird by canceling, don't make it weird." That line stayed with me because why would it be weird for a bride to want to stay home the week before her wedding, unless somebody really needed her gone? On Thursday night, the night before I left, I stood in our bedroom trying to zip a duffel bag that definitely didn't need to be as heavy as it was. He came up behind me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and rested his chin on my shoulder. "I want you to have fun and stop worrying about me," he said. It would have been sweet if it hadn't sounded exactly like a man rehearsing for a jury. I laughed and said I wasn't worried. "Good," he said a little too quickly. Then he kissed my cheek like we'd just settled something important. On Friday morning, during the drive to the resort, my friends were sending voice notes. The group chat was nonstop, and I kept staring out at the highway like maybe my body knew something my mind refused to admit. I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself stress makes everything feel suspicious. I told myself not every strange feeling means betrayal. Sometimes a man is just distracted. Sometimes weddings make people act weird. Sometimes your nervous system is just a rude little alarm that goes off because someone breathed too loudly in another room. Still, when I arrived and everyone ran over with drinks and fake outrage because I was the last one to reply to the room assignment message, I felt split in two. Half of me smiled and let them pull me in. The other half was still back home, staring at our front door in my mind like it already knew more than I did. That first night at the resort should have been easy. A fire pit, cheap wine, and one friend trying to make us all play a question game that somehow always turned into gentle public humiliation. Everyone was warm, loud, and sentimental in the way people get when they're genuinely happy for you, and maybe a little relieved it isn't their turn yet. I laughed when I was supposed to laugh. I gave the little bride speeches. I even let them put a ridiculous veil on me for photos. But the entire time, there was this constant heaviness under my ribs like my brain had one hand on the emergency brake. My best friend noticed first. She always does, and I hate that for me. She sat beside me with a drink and asked, "Why do you look like you're about to either cry or commit tax fraud?" I told her I was just tired. She raised one eyebrow in that deeply annoying way that said she'd known me too long to believe a lazy lie. I brushed it off. Wedding stress, my mother, too many opinions about flowers, all technically true, none of it was the real reason. We stayed up later than we should have, and on Saturday morning I woke up with that dry mouth, puffy face, low-grade headache combination that makes you feel like your own body is protesting. I stood in the bathroom staring at myself, mascara smudged beneath my eyes, my hair doing something absolutely hateful. Then a stupid thought hit me so hard I actually sat down on the edge of the bathtub. I want to go home and cook dinner for him, not because that's my job, not because I'm one of those women. Just because I suddenly needed to see him being ordinary. I needed to watch him stand in the kitchen, complain about work, reach for a spoon, and prove my instincts wrong. I tried to talk myself out of it for maybe 20 or 30 minutes. I paced around the room while my friends were downstairs searching for coffee like survivalists. I kept thinking, if you leave now, you'll look crazy. If you go home and find nothing, you'll have driven all that way because your anxiety got the better of you. But the longer I ignored the feeling, the stronger it became. It shifted from nervousness into certainty so quietly I almost didn't notice. One moment I was embarrassed by my own suspicion. The next, I knew I had to get in my car. I told the group I had a headache and wanted to drive into town to pick up some medicine. One of them offered to come with me. I said no a little too quickly, then forced a smile that probably looked normal but definitely wasn't. My best friend followed me outside anyway. She leaned against my car and said, "Something's wrong." It wasn't a question, it was simply a fact between us. I almost told her then. I almost said, "I think my fiancé is lying to me, and I don't even know why I feel that way. I feel stupid just saying it out loud." Instead, I shook my head and said I just needed some air. The drive back to the city felt much longer than it should have. I kept switching between anger and embarrassment, which is a terrible combination because you feel dramatic and completely justified at the same time. Every few minutes I'd convince myself I was overreacting. Then I'd remember the look on his face when he told me to enjoy the weekend, that eager little push in his voice, and my stomach would tighten all over again. By the time I reached our street, my hands were cold on the steering wheel even though the heat was on. Then I saw the car in the driveway, not his, not mine, not anyone I recognized. Just a strange car sitting there like it belonged at our house. His car was in the garage, which meant he was home. Which meant his "I'll be working all day" excuse was already a lie before I even turned off the engine. I didn't get out right away. I just sat there staring, hoping a reasonable explanation would somehow appear. A delivery, a friend, a neighbor, an emergency, a surprise, anything. My heart was pounding so hard it made my throat ache. Instead of walking inside, I called him. He answered on the second ring, his voice bright, casual, and completely relaxed. "Hey baby," I looked at the garage, I looked at the unfamiliar car, then I asked where he was. "At work," he said without even pausing. That was the moment something inside me went cold, not broken. Not shattered, just cold, like my heart had stopped making excuses without telling me. I kept him on the phone longer than necessary because I wanted to hear if guilt would change his voice. It didn't. Somehow that hurt the most. He sounded cheerful, distracted, even slightly annoyed in the way people do when they're pretending to be busy and need you to help keep the lie alive. I asked how work was going. He said he was drowning in deadlines. I asked if he'd eat. He laughed and said, "Not yet." Then he told me he loved me, twice, with this overly sweet enthusiasm that made me grip the steering wheel until my fingers hurt. I said maybe I'll stop by later. He answered far too quickly, "Don't, I'll probably be here late." There it was again, another gentle push away from the house. When we hung up, he sent me 3 messages within a minute, a heart emoji, a kissing face, and "miss you already." It might have sounded romantic to anyone else. But I knew he had just lied to me while standing inside the home we shared. I sat there for another minute, maybe 5. Time becomes strange when humiliation takes over. My first instinct was to walk through the front door and force the truth to face me. My second was to drive straight through the garage and let the universe deal with the consequences. Instead, I did neither. Maybe that was the last bit of self-control I still had. I got out quietly and walked along the narrow path beside the house, half gravel and half covered with dead leaves. I remember hearing every little sound my shoes made, as if the entire world had turned into a microphone. The curtains in our bedroom were partly closed. Not enough for me to see clearly, but open just enough for the voices to drift outside. His voice came first, low, relaxed, intimate, then a woman laughed. My knees actually gave way. People say that in stories all the time, but it's true. My legs turned weak, and I had to brace myself against the side of the house to keep from collapsing. Without thinking, I pulled out my phone and hit record. not because I had some brilliant plan, but because when your life suddenly falls apart, you want proof. You want something to hold on to when someone later tries to call it a misunderstanding. I couldn't see them clearly through the gap in the curtains. Just blurred shapes and movement enough to make my stomach turn, but I could hear them. That was more than enough, his laugh, her voice, the rustle of the sheets. Then he said something low and smug that made my hands shake even harder. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard enough to know he felt completely safe. Enough to know this wasn't a mistake or a one-time lapse in judgment. He sounded comfortable, like he had rehearsed the lie so many times that it came naturally. At one point she laughed and he said, "I can't believe we're doing this here in our bed." In the room where half the wedding decorations were stacked in stupid labeled boxes because apparently irony loves props. I should tell you that I didn't burst in dramatically, I didn't kick the door open, I didn't scream. Part of it was shock, part of it was pride. And part of it was the awful realization that if I walked in too soon, he would instantly switch from a guilty man to the manager of my emotions. He would start explaining, begging, grabbing my wrists, trying to make the scene bigger than the choice he had already made. I could already feel my mind shutting down. I couldn't handle his version of chaos on top of my own. Then came a sound I'll spare you the details of because, honestly, it doesn't need details to be disgusting. It was intimate, obvious, and impossible to misunderstand. I stopped recording. I backed away so quickly I almost slipped. My body took over at that point. I got into my car, locked the doors like they were about to come running after me, and sat there with both hands over my mouth because I thought I was actually going to throw up. I remember staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror and thinking, this cannot be happening to me in my own driveway, not because I thought I was special, but because it felt so absurd. Of all the places for my life to fall apart, why did it have to be the same driveway where we used to unload groceries together? I drove back to the resort on what I can only describe as emotional autopilot. I don't remember half the turns I took. I do remember switching back and forth between crying and feeling completely numb. At one red light, I wiped my face, stared straight ahead and thought, if I get hit right now, at least I won't have to decide what to do next. It sounds dark, and it was. But I'm telling you the truth, not because I wanted to die, but because I desperately wanted 5 minutes without having to think. When I got back, everyone was outside on the lawn playing some silly group game with cups. I parked terribly, bad enough to insult my driver's license. I grabbed a bottle from the kitchen, walked into the nearest bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the floor in my cute little weekend outfit. Drinking straight from the bottle like I'd been cast in a cautionary ad about women who ignore their instincts. That's where my best friend found me. She knocked once, then again, and finally called my name in the voice people use when they already know something is terribly wrong. I opened the door, and the second I saw her face, I completely fell apart. Not graceful tears, not one cinematic tear rolling down my cheek. I mean ugly, breathless, humiliating sobbing, the kind where words come out in broken pieces and you can't even breathe properly. She helped me off the floor and took me into one of the bedrooms, away from everyone else. It took forever to explain because every time I reached the part about the phone call, I wanted to scream. I played her the recording. She went completely still while listening, so still that it actually scared me. When it ended, she put the phone down and quietly said, "I will help you bury him." To be clear, it wasn't a literal threat, it was friendship in its purest form. For the next hour or two, maybe longer, I kept swinging between rage and complete emotional collapse. 1 minute I wanted to call him and destroy his life. The next, I never wanted to hear his voice again. I said I should go back and throw every wedding decoration into the yard. Then I said maybe I should just disappear and let him explain to everyone why the bride had vanished. My best friend let me spiral because she knew there was no point interrupting the first wave of grief. Then she asked the only question that really mattered. What hurts the most right now, I told her, he gets to control the story if I confront him. And there it was, because if I stormed back into that house he would pivot, men like him always do. Suddenly it wouldn't be about the cheating anymore. It would be about the fight, the misunderstanding, my timing, my reaction, my anger, my tone, my invasion of his privacy. The betrayal would still exist, but it would be buried inside a story he helped create and then narrated. I refused to become another woman standing in a room full of people while being told she was overreacting to the very thing he forced her to witness. That was the first moment the idea of canceling the wedding truly took shape. It wasn't some brilliant revenge plan. It wasn't elegant or glamorous, it was survival. I wanted one thing, maybe the only thing I still had left, control over my own exit. I didn't need to scream to know what had happened. I didn't need his confession to validate the car, the phone call, the voices, or the recording. What I needed was to stop him from wrapping himself in my forgiveness before I'd even finished bleeding. So I said, I'm not marrying him. My best friend simply nodded, like she had known that was going to be my answer from the moment she heard the recording. Then she said, okay, then let's think. The next morning, after maybe 2 hours of sleep and what felt like 10 years of emotional aging, I checked out early. I told the others a family emergency had come up, which wasn't even a lie if discovering your fiancé is a lying idiot counts as a family event. My best friend came with me. I wasn't ready to be alone, and she refused to let me go anywhere by myself while I still had that numb look people get when they're one bad decision away from changing their lives forever. I didn't go home, I couldn't. The thought of walking back into that bedroom made my skin crawl. Instead, I stayed at her place, sleeping in borrowed clothes, eating dry cereal at her kitchen counter, and replying to his messages with the calm politeness of someone buying time. He texted as if nothing had happened. That part still gets me. He asked if I was feeling better. He said he missed me. He mentioned that his parents wanted to know what time we'd arrive at the venue on the wedding day. He even said he might stay with them the night before the ceremony to make logistics easier and, as he put it, build anticipation. I almost laughed. Build anticipation? No. What you built was a crater. I replied carefully because, by then, I knew the closer we got to the wedding, the more dangerous the truth would become if I wasn't ready to end everything. I told him I was emotional and wanted to preserve the surprise of the day. He believed every word. Of course he did. Nothing flatters a liar more than being mistaken for someone who's still loved. Meanwhile, my best friend drove past the house just to check. The same unfamiliar car was parked there again. Again, it shouldn't have shocked me, but it did. Maybe because some naive part of me still wanted to believe the first time had been a terrible mistake, a single moment of stupidity instead of an ongoing affair. But there it was, same driveway. Same disrespect, same man. The next day I went back to the house alone because I needed clothes, important documents, and whatever was left of my self-respect buried beneath stacks of wedding stationery. The place was spotless in that suspicious, overcorrected way guilty people clean. The bed was made too perfectly. The counters had been wiped down. A scented candle I'd never bought was burning in the living room, and I stared at it so hard I thought I might set it on fire with my eyes. I packed what mattered: work clothes, my passport, laptop, my grandmother's jewelry, and the small, ugly mug I loved because my fiancé once joked that it looked depressed. I'm petty enough to rescue an object out of pure spite. Everything else felt contaminated or replaceable. Then I sat at the kitchen table and looked around the house we'd built one budget spreadsheet at a time. The couch I'd paid more toward, the dishes I'd picked out. The framed print above the hallway table that he claimed to love but probably never even noticed. None of it felt real anymore. Not because it hadn't happened, but because betrayal has a way of poisoning even your happiest memories. It takes moments that once felt genuine and coats them in suspicion until you can't remember them without feeling foolish. He came home while I was still there. I heard the key turn in the lock and every muscle in my body froze. I'd imagined this moment 100 times. I wasn't ready. He walked in carrying coffee, smiling, already talking before he fully saw me. Hey, I thought you were staying with, then he stopped. He immediately realized something was wrong, but he guessed the wrong problem. He assumed it was normal wedding stress. Maybe we'd argue, maybe I was nervous. Maybe I'd found a text he forgot to delete, but not the whole truth. He actually leaned in to kiss my cheek. I turned away. His expression shifted from confusion to concern, then to quiet defensiveness. What's going on? You might expect a dramatic confrontation here. You won't get one. Real life is often quieter and crueler than fiction. I looked at him and realized that if I started talking, I'd either never stop or never say enough. There was no middle ground. So I didn't confront him, not yet. I simply said I was overwhelmed and didn't want to talk. I told him I needed some space before the wedding. He asked if I was mad. I said yes. He asked if it was because of my mother. I nearly laughed. Imagine being betrayed that deeply and still having to admire how completely wrong his guesses were. He tried to hug me. I stepped back. He looked hurt, which only made me want to put my own head through the wall. Then he started apologizing for being distracted lately, for work stress, for not being emotionally present, for adding pressure during the wedding planning. It was unbelievable. He apologized around the betrayal, like a man carefully avoiding the elephant in the room, hoping that if he complimented the curtains, the elephant might quietly leave. I let him keep talking just long enough to confirm what I already knew. He thought he still had time to manage me, time to smooth everything over. Time to walk into our wedding and marry me while I was still living inside the version of reality he'd created. When he finally stopped, I told him I needed to be alone and might stay with family until the wedding day. He asked, "Are we okay?" I answered, "We'll see." That reply haunted him for about 0 seconds because he wanted to believe it meant pre-wedding nerves, not the end of everything. That evening, he left to stay with his parents, just as planned. I watched him walk away with his duffel bag and a cheerful little wave while I stood in the doorway trying not to tell him that if hell exists, I hope it's filled with seating charts, fake vows, and every scented candle you've ever hated. Once he was gone, I called my grandmother. She was the only person in my family I trusted not to turn this into a lecture about appearances, endurance, or the sacred tradition of suffering in silence. She listened, really listened, no dramatic gasps, no "are you sure?" No interrupting to make it about herself. When I finished, she quietly said, "Come here if you need to disappear for a while." That almost made me cry more than the cheating itself. Not because it was dramatic, but because kindness, when you're deeply humiliated, feels like the first crack in a dam. I told her I might take her up on the offer. She said her guest room was ready whether I arrived with 2 bags or none. Then came the ugly practical part. I drafted an email canceling the wedding. Do you know how surreal it is to write a sentence explaining that your wedding isn't happening because the man you were about to marry was sleeping with someone else in your own home while telling you he loved you? It feels unreal even as you type it, like you're writing about someone else's disaster, except your own name keeps showing up in every paragraph. I kept the email simple because I was far too exhausted to make it poetic. I wrote it that night and left it unsent, not to his side, not to mine, not yet. That night, after he left for his parents' place, I stayed only long enough to gather a few more things and make the calls I had been avoiding. My mother called first with wedding questions, and that was when I finally told her the truth. She asked if I was sure, which made me furious. But once I sent her the audio and the photos, both of my parents understood exactly what kind of man he was. Later that night, I called my grandmother again, just to hear the one voice that never made me defend my own pain. The next 6 days before the wedding turned into a strange little theater production where only one person knew the show had already been canceled. He kept texting sweet messages, asking if he should bring anything to my parents' house after the ceremony, asking if I wanted to save the top tier of the cake or freeze individual slices like people in those old advice columns. Every night he sent a heart emoji as if routine could somehow cover the truth. There's something deeply unsettling about being lied to by someone who still expects affection in return. It makes every normal conversation feel contaminated. I played along just enough to keep him calm, not because I enjoyed it. God, no. Half the time I had to put my phone down and walk around the room afterward like I had swallowed bleach, but I knew if I pulled away too soon, he would sense something was wrong. Then I'd have to deal with a confrontation before I was ready, and I had already decided I wasn't going to spend the last few days before this disaster comforting the man who caused it. My parents came around slowly. My mother asked to see everything I had. I sent her the audio recording and the photos of that woman's car in my driveway on more than one occasion. Maybe it wasn't enough for some dramatic courtroom scene, but it was enough for real people living in the real world, enough to know the truth. My father called after listening to the recording. He sounded angrier than I expected, not loud angry, quiet angry, the kind that comes out calm, clipped, and controlled. He said you do not owe him a performance of forgiveness. That helped more than he probably realized. There were still practical things to deal with: vendors, deposits, and guests. My inbox looked like a dream wedding being held hostage by spreadsheets. I handled what I could with a numb kind of efficiency. The venue still had a final balance due because we had scheduled the last payment close to the wedding date. I left it that way, not as some master plan, but because I genuinely hadn't gotten around to it in the middle of all the chaos. Once I realized the timing, though, I didn't rush to fix it. For once, I let the consequences find the right doorstep. On Friday night, the evening before the wedding, I packed one suitcase and drove to my grandmother's house in another state. The drive was long enough to make me feel like I was peeling myself out of my old life, one layer at a time. My phone wouldn't stop lighting up. Friends checked in, a cousin asked where I'd be getting ready, and he even sent me a smiling selfie from the place where he was staying, looking like a man who still believed he had a future. I muted everyone except the few people who truly mattered. My grandmother opened the door wearing slippers and a robe. She didn't say anything dramatic. She simply looked at my face and pulled me into the kitchen. She made tea even though I didn't want any. Older women have a way of believing hot drinks can fix things therapy only dreams of. I sat at her kitchen table beneath a light that was far too bright and finally managed to say it without my voice breaking. He cheated in our home while I was away. Because he pushed me to go, she pressed her lips together, nodded once, and asked, "Do you want to stay hidden or do you want to make a statement?" Those were her exact words. And that's one of the reasons I adore her. No lectures, no cliches about healing, just two simple choices. Both, I answered. 1 week after I discovered the truth, on the Saturday morning that was supposed to be our wedding day. While he was getting dressed and people were steaming tablecloths and pretending romance was just logistics and flowers, I loaded my suitcase into the car outside my grandmother's house and opened the email I had written days earlier. It wasn't long or dramatic, just the truth. I had discovered his infidelity, the wedding was canceled, and I would not be discussing the details any further that day. I sent it to all my guests, leaving out only a few mutual contacts who might have warned him too early. Petty, maybe. Efficient, absolutely. Then I turned off my location, ignored the first wave of phone calls, and kept driving. By the time the ceremony was supposed to begin, I was sitting in my grandmother's living room wearing leggings and an old sweatshirt, staring at my phone as it lit up like an electrical fire. His name, my mother, my father, unknown numbers, then my best friend. I answered only her. She whispered, "It's chaos." I closed my eyes. Good, I thought, not because I enjoy destruction, I don't. But because, for once, the chaos was finally in the right place. According to my best friend, everything unraveled slowly at first, then all at once. People simply noticed I wasn't there. No panic at first, no suspicion. Just the usual wedding assumption that the bride was in another room getting her hair fixed, dress zipped, makeup touched up, and being emotionally managed by a small army of women with bobby pins. He was calm too, walking around, greeting guests, checking his phone, smiling for relatives, completely playing the part. That made sense. Liars usually perform best when they believe they still control the timing. Then my email reached the guests. People from my side stopped whispering and started showing one another their phones. One aunt gasped loudly enough to turn heads. Someone asked one of the bridesmaids if it was true. Someone else hurried to find my mother. My best friend said you could actually feel the mood in the room change, like the sudden drop in temperature before a storm. Not explosive, something worse, slow, public, and impossible to ignore. He kept calling me over and over, no answer. Then the text started, "Where are you? What is this? Please answer me." A few minutes later came, "We can explain this. We can fix this." An interesting choice of pronoun from a man who had been making very personal decisions on his own. At some point, his father tried to calm everyone down by saying there had been an emergency and that the ceremony would simply be delayed. Meanwhile, the event manager, who I still think deserves an award for staying professional during absolute chaos, started asking practical questions about the remaining balance, the cancellation policy, and who would be responsible for the expenses already triggered that morning. That's when the financial humiliation began. We hadn't finished paying the venue. I had delayed the final payment because money had already been disappearing from every direction. Now they were standing there in formal clothes, trying to negotiate payment for a wedding that was falling apart in real time. His father eventually stepped in and agreed to cover the remaining balance to prevent an even bigger scene in the venue lobby. According to my best friend, that was the moment he stopped defending his son. Something in him shifted. Maybe it was pride, or maybe just the shock of seeing his son's stupidity turn into consequences. Later that afternoon, after the whole situation had spread through both families, I finally turned my phone back on. The screen flooded with messages, each one following the same predictable pattern: confusion, pleading, anger, then self-pity. I read a few because, apparently, pain and curiosity are roommates. Please talk to me, this isn't what it looks like. You blindsided me, how could you do this publicly? We could have handled this privately. I made a mistake, I love you, please. Just let me explain. That last one almost made me laugh. Explain what exactly? The driveway, the phone call, the woman in my bed. Or the fact that he had enough confidence to send me away for the weekend, then lie to my face while his car was still sitting in the garage. I didn't reply that day, or the next, or the one after. My parents went back to the house to collect the rest of my things. I gave them a list over the phone, room by room. Because there are few things more humiliating than trying to remember where you left your passport while your father quietly processes the man he nearly called family. They packed what mattered, my documents, a few boxes, work clothes, jewelry, and some random kitchen items I wanted only because I had paid for them. Spite, it turns out, is a renewable resource. He was there when they arrived. According to my father, he looked awful, pale, unshaven, like a man who had slept in the same clothes for days. He kept asking where I was, saying he needed to talk to me. He kept trying to describe the whole thing as something that had simply gotten out of hand, which is an interesting way to describe your own choices once the consequences finally catch up. My father told him very plainly that nobody had forced him to cheat, nobody had forced him to lie. And nobody had forced him to turn our shared home into whatever disgusting arrangement he'd been running. My mother, who had started the week asking if I should hear him out, looked at him and said, "You don't get to ask for grace from the person you humiliated." That was a nice surprise. Before leaving for my grandmother's house, I had left a short note in the kitchen. "I know, don't contact me." Next to it were printed photos of that woman's car parked in our driveway on more than one day. My father said he stared at them for a long time without saying a word. Good, let him enjoy the silence. The first couple of weeks after the wedding that never happened didn't feel like a clean break. It felt more like living inside the smoke after something had burned down. Everyone had an opinion. Some people supported me without hesitation. Others gave those awful balanced takes, saying cheating was wrong but gently suggesting that public humiliation might have been too much. A few mutual friends tried to stay on good terms with both of us, speaking like bored diplomats while I was still trying not to cry in grocery stores. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town because I couldn't bear the thought of staying in that house. Even if I had legal or financial reasons to stay, I didn't want to win square footage. I wanted my peace back. The apartment had thin walls, unreliable water pressure, and one lonely window overlooking a parking lot with a single tragic tree doing its best. It was perfect, not glamorous, not victorious. Just mine. Money was tighter than I wanted to admit. Weddings are basically bonfires you feed with your savings, and even after a few refunds, most of what I'd spent was simply gone. I picked up extra shifts at work. I stopped ordering takeout. I learned just how many meals a woman can make with eggs, rice, and spite. Meanwhile, I heard through mutual friends that he had to move out too because he couldn't afford the rent without me. That didn't make me happy exactly, but it did give me a very human, very imperfect sense of balance. Actions, consequences, revolutionary concept. His parents didn't cut him off, but they certainly weren't defending him anymore. He stayed with them for a while, and from what I heard, the atmosphere in that house was tense enough to qualify as a weather event. His mother reached out once with a message that tried very hard to sound neutral and ended up sounding carefully disappointed. She apologized for the pain that had been caused and said she hoped that one day there could be peace. I appreciated the apology. I ignored the hope. Peace is not the same thing as access. My own family surprised me in different ways. My father became unexpectedly protective without being overbearing, which meant a lot because he has never been comfortable with emotional conversations. My mother kept circling back to appearances, not because she cared more about image than me, but because image is the language she speaks when she doesn't know how to deal with pain. She worried about who knew what, she worried about how people would talk, she worried that my silence would leave room for rumors. Finally, I told her that anyone who cared so much about the reputation of a cancelled wedding was welcome to marry him themselves. That bought me a peaceful 48 hours. Later, once the worst had passed, she got better, not perfect, just better, less worried about appearances, more concerned about whether I was eating, sleeping, and getting through each day. The hardest part wasn't even the anger. Anger is active, sometimes it's useful. It gets you through packing boxes, changing passwords, and calling utility companies with a steady voice while your entire inner world feels like it's collapsing. He kept trying to reach me through other people, mutual friends, his mother, even a cousin who should have minded her own business. It was always the same message wrapped in different words. He wanted to explain, he wanted one conversation, he wanted closure, he wanted me to hear his side. I shut it down every single time, not because I felt strong every day. Sometimes I was furious. Sometimes I was shaking. Sometimes I wanted to answer just to ask if he genuinely thought the problem was that I simply hadn't heard enough. But I had already lived through enough of his version of events. Getting over it wasn't a straight line. Some mornings I felt almost normal. Then I'd hear a certain laugh in a restaurant or catch the smell of his laundry detergent on a stranger in an elevator, and my whole body would tense as if it was expecting impact. My best friend said that was normal. She was right. I didn't miss him in the way people assume. I missed the version of my life that hadn't been contaminated yet. I missed certainty. I missed feeling stupid only in the harmless, funny ways. About 4 months later, I got careless, not emotionally but logistically. I had settled into routines, the kind that make you believe danger has gotten bored and moved on. The same coffee shop near work twice a week, the same table if it was available. The same stupid blueberry muffin I kept pretending I'd stop ordering because it tasted like sugar disguised as breakfast. I hadn't seen him in months. I hadn't even thought about running into him. That was my mistake. I had started believing the city was big enough for both of us to disappear into different corners and never cross paths again. I was wrong. It was one of the first places in the city that felt completely separate from him, from the wedding planning, from our mutual friends, and from all the haunted little corners of the previous year. So when I walked in one Thursday and saw him already sitting near the window, my first reaction wasn't fear or anger, it was calculation. He had never been there before. Not once in the 3 months I'd been coming there, which meant either it was a miserable coincidence or he had figured out my routine. Neither possibility made me feel safe. I actually stopped mid-step hard enough that the woman behind me bumped into my shoulder. He stood up immediately. He didn't rush toward me, just enough to make it clear he intended to talk. He looked thinner, tired, not ruined, not broken, not dramatically transformed by guilt in some deeply satisfying way, just worn around the edges, which annoyingly made him look more sympathetic. Men have an unfair relationship with damage. 1 week of bad sleep and suddenly they look like a poem to people who should know better. "I'm not here to cause a scene," he said. I laughed once. "That's generous." He asked if he could have 5 minutes. I should have walked away, I know. But part of me wanted to hear what kind of nonsense had survived this long in his head and still managed to come out sounding like an explanation. And, if I'm honest, there was a little ego in it too. Curiosity, that almost anthropological urge to study the creature who still believed I might be willing to have a conversation after everything. So I sat. I kept my bag on my lap, ready to leave at the first sign I needed to. He noticed. Good. He started talking too fast, the way people do when they know they have very little time and an impossible case to make. He said he wasn't trying to pressure me. He just wanted me to hear the truth from him once, which was funny because I already had, in a way, through a partially closed curtain. According to him, it hadn't been an emotional affair. Not a relationship, not even something ongoing in any meaningful sense. It was physical, he said, isolated, stupid, meaningless. A woman he knew through work. Someone with a reputation for discreet situations. I didn't ask for her name, I didn't want it. Knowing who she was wouldn't change what he had done. And honestly, she wasn't the one who had promised me forever. He was. She owed me nothing. He owed me everything. He used the phrase, discreet situations, as if he were discussing the weather instead of admitting he'd been sleeping with someone else in the weeks leading up to our wedding. He said he'd gotten inside his own head about marriage, about permanence, about choosing one person forever. He claimed he panicked and wanted to get his curiosity out of his system before the wedding. It was such a selfish, rotten line of thinking that I actually felt the air around me grow thinner. Not because I was shocked anymore, because he still believed words like curiosity made what he had done sound smaller, as if betrayal could be softened by better vocabulary. I let him talk. That was probably my first mistake. Silence encourages people like him. They mistake restraint for openness. He kept going. He said he had never stopped loving me. He said it was never about replacing me. He said the wedding had always been real to him. He said he planned to end it, commit fully, and bury the whole thing. Wow. How lucky I almost married into a carefully managed secret. When I finally spoke, my own voice surprised me, calm, flat. So your defense is that you intended to lie forever? He flinched, but only for a second. No, he said. My defense is that it was ugly and stupid and it didn't mean what it looked like. That sentence sat between us like spoiled milk. I asked if he'd only been with her once. He hesitated. Just a tiny pause, that was answer enough. I smiled without any joy and looked down at my coffee because apparently, even then a part of me preferred my humiliation in manageable doses. He started saying my name in that soft voice he always used whenever he wanted me to slip back into the version of us where he explained and I forgave. I cut him off. Don't talk to me like I'm still your person. His eyes filled with that wounded expression. I hated that too. Because guilty people can still feel hurt, and seeing it can wake up every old habit you thought you'd buried, comforting, explaining, managing the emotional temperature in the room. I'd done that for years without realizing it, not this time. He said he was trying to take responsibility. I said no. You're trying to survive your own image of yourself. That shut him up for a moment. Then, because apparently humiliation comes in layers, he changed tactics. He said I could have confronted him that day, right there at the house before the wedding, as if I had somehow chosen the public collapse when there had been an easier option, which was unbelievable. The man who cheated on me in our own home while I was away at my Bachelorette trip wanted to criticize the way I handled it. He said you didn't have to destroy everything. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the nerve of that sentence deserved a reaction. You destroyed it, I said. I just refused to help you hide it. He rubbed his face, looked down, then brought up his parents, how devastated and humiliated they were, how his father had to cover the venue costs. It was the same old trick, make me feel responsible for everyone else's pain. I felt sad but not guilty. Consequences don't become unfair just because they affect other people. As I stood to leave, he asked for one more minute and then said something unbelievable. If I could move past what happened, he would forgive the way I handled the wedding cancellation. Forgive me. I stared at him in disbelief. He quickly backtracked, saying we'd both hurt each other and maybe neither of us had been at our best. But in that moment, any remaining affection I had disappeared. Then he offered to repay the wedding expenses I had personally covered. It was obvious his parents had pushed him into taking responsibility. I didn't care why he was paying, I just wanted my money back. I told him repayment would be the first step toward accountability, nothing more. He looked relieved, thinking I was leaving the door open. I wasn't. We agreed on one thing only. He would repay me, even in installments if necessary, and I would unblock him only to discuss payments. Nothing else. Over the next 2 months, he worked extra jobs, borrowed money, and kept sending payments along with messages about missing me and wanting another chance. I replied with short, emotionless responses like received, noted, or send by Friday. Sometimes I felt emotionally drained, not because I wanted him back, but because staying in contact, even for practical reasons, was exhausting. He later sent a long message saying losing me had changed him and that he wanted to become someone worthy of speaking to me again. I didn't reply to the speech. I simply sent him the remaining balance. When the first major payment arrived, I felt relief, sadness, and vindication all at once. Money couldn't erase betrayal, but getting back what I'd lost felt like reclaiming something that was mine. The following weeks felt like a business arrangement. He kept trying to turn every payment into an emotional conversation with memories, songs, and old stories. I ignored all of it. I wanted my money back, not my past. My father gave me the best advice: know the price of every conversation. After that, I became even more distant. Eventually, he admitted, "It feels like you talk to me like I'm a utility company." He was right, that was exactly what he had become. When the final payment finally arrived, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Moments later, he texted, "It's done. Can we really talk now?" I had already prepared my answer. I told him I had stayed in contact for one reason only: repayment. That was finished, and so was any obligation between us. I said he had mistaken access for hope and regret for change. Loving me would have required honesty before the damage, not apologies afterward. Then I ended with the only sentence that truly mattered: a woman should fight for a man worth keeping, and you proved you weren't. He begged for one more chance, saying that after paying everything back, he thought we could finally start over. I didn't reply. I blocked his number, his email, and every other way he could reach me. A week later, I used part of the money to replace things I'd been struggling without and put the rest into savings. He didn't lose me because I exposed him. He lost me the moment he decided I was easier to lie to than worth telling the truth.
If you made it this far, thank you for listening. No one deserves to be betrayed by the person they trusted most. If you were in this situation, do you think she handled it right way, or would you have done something differently? Share your thought in the comments. I read every one of them, and if you enjoy real life Reddit stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. See you in the next one.